Hello everybody and welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where we code a complete game live on stream. We are in the middle of updating our debug code, so I'd like to get right into that. If you want to follow along at home, you can, of course, pre-order the game on handmadehero.org, which, if you've done that, you want to download day 248 source code, because that's what I'm starting with today. All right, moving on. Let's see where we left off. If I remember correctly, there was something that I kind of wanted to do at the end of last stream, and I put a little to-do in there for us. So maybe that's actually the first thing that we'll do. But let's just mention where we left off. We were kind of starting to try and finish this stuff up, and I found that it was kind of in a state that was actually relatively usable. So we're able to sort of go in here and use this to create various systems, but there's a couple things we had to kind of clean up. First of all, we get this weird thing where all names are always forced through the hierarchy system, so it creates these dummy nodes for things, even if we didn't actually necessarily want that. Of course, in this case, we kind of do want that, and so we have to kind of decide how we want those to go. Do we want to just always have data blocks for that purpose, or how do we want to do it? So we got that. But the other thing we want to do is turn back on the profiling and make the profiling more usable, since we're recording profile information, but right now we're not really using it for anything. And so in order to do that, what I would like to do is just have a way of adding profilers into our sort of set of things here. And doing that should be relatively straightforward, because since we have a way of talking about these things, so I'll just go ahead and load up Handmade here. I believe what I did was inside handmade.cpp, I had a debug block here, and what I want to be able to do is sort of just say, okay, whenever we have like this sort of stuff in like a debug block like this, I want to just be able to say, okay, let's create a debug profile right here. Let's put it in this debug block, and what I want to do is just say what function I'm trying to profile. Let's just say. So this is a timed function right here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, let's go ahead and get that timed function. Let's just have game update and render be timed and put in this profile. So that's what I'd like to do. Of course, if I compile that, it's going to be a pretty significant error, because debug profile is not actually something we have ever defined. So I need to go into the interface and add the ability to sort of put that in there. And so I think all that really has to happen is we just have to mirror exactly the way that we were doing these other things. So when we say like debug value or whatever, that's really all we actually have to do, I think. So all I want to do is just have a pound define here for debug profile. I want to have the like function name that we're trying to start at, so like where we are on the profiling. And so all that's going to do is this, I think, this exact thing. So it's literally just going to record, this in here. Although I think we probably want, well, I guess since it's already got an actual name here, I suppose I can just say, hey, the function that you're trying to profile is this function, right? Now, I feel like that's pretty much all that should have to happen. And so we can just pass here that what I wanted the type to be was that sort of trace type that we had, right? Because we've got this, this notion, actually it's an interface. We've got this notion of the counter thread list or whatever. So we can say what we actually want that to be. What I think I might do here is introduce another type, which is just to say, like, I'm not going to say specifically how I want this thing to be profiled necessarily. Well, maybe, yeah. Well, I don't know. Let's just say, let's re-enable this, right? Counter function list, and let's just say that that's what we want. So we want a counter function list. We want to say that this is the function name that'll be scoped to. And so when we record that event, it will go into the stream, and that will allow us to pick it back up on the other side when the debug system encounters it. And so when the debug system encounters that written in there, then all I need to do is tell it, which is it's going to be in here, right? So we're going to come through here, and we're going to get down to the part where we're inside a data block or something like that, and we see it, and we would store that element here. once we store that element inside the data block, we should be able to encounter it when we are iterating over the elements. And so all we need is something that can output that function list. Now, I don't actually think we still have any actual drawing code for that. You can see here where we've got this kind of like debug type counter thread list thing. I feel like this calls debug draw event always. It does not call debug draw element. And so I don't really know. I don't really know if that's a problem or not. Like, I don't really know. I guess what I would say about that is maybe that doesn't really want to be part of the actual data blocks. I don't know. So the reason it's a little bit confusing is because we have a notion of two different things. There's debug elements, which can actually exist in sort of multiple hierarchies. We can have like lots of those. And then there's debug events, which are things that came through the stream and that we're trying to record. And so I think that maybe, now that I think about it actually, we may just want to make that create a debug element to not actually have it have to think about data blocks at all, right? So like, you know, when we're running through here and we see one, we could just make that be its own element, right? So we do these event types and we see the different kinds, begin block, end block, open data block, close data block. We could just say, oh, okay, when we see debug type, what was that guy's name? It was like the function dude, right? So counter function list. When we see counter function list as something that we are going to add, what we could do is say, well, whatever that debug element is, because we've already got one for ourselves, right? We've already parsed out an element for ourselves. It's this guy right here, this debug element. What we could do is take that debug element and use that debug element as the one that creates the profile. That might happen automatically, now that I think about it. So I don't really know that there's all that much we would have to do here. So I'm going to start by seeing what that actually does. So I'm curious. All right, so what did we call that? We called that guy game update and render, but I don't see him here, which is a little bit odd because I feel like it should have created a game update and render. I guess because it's root, it wouldn't. That's actually, okay, so that's actually true. So I suppose what I actually need to do is I need to actually do something that takes, that does that insertion into the group. So inside, let me see here, debug CVP. So inside here where I've got my get element from event, when we do this sort of thing and we do add element to group, this is the part that I guess is not really happening, right? It's getting a parent group, but there isn't a parent group to get. Add element to group, I want to see what does that actually program to do. So it should insert it at the root. I want to set a breakpoint here, I think. I want to see what happens when we get this dude. Mark debug value, is that used anymore either? Speaking of cleanup, do we need that still? I want to take a look at what happens if I just get rid of that. I don't think so. So that's going to. All right. So yeah, I feel like that should have inserted it, but it didn't. So I'm still a little hazy on why. So what I would like to do is say, okay, when we hit this, because you'll note, right, I mean, the reason I say that is because everyone else gets their stubs. And I guess it's just because it only creates people in the node. It only does the precursor. So it only does global, renderer, and camera. It never does the final one. So for example, I guess, just to double check that my understanding of that is correct, you can kind of see here, if I was to do something like this, or that, would it create the foo? And my argument is yes, it would create the foo, and it just doesn't create the other part, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it does actually, so it is actually inserting it. It just doesn't, we don't ever actually see it because we have not actually done anything with it. So I could do something like this, where I say debug profile, game update and render. The thing is, I need to say where it's going to go, and so I would need to sort of expand the call to have some notion of what the function name was in addition, right? Because we need sort of like where does it go and what the function name is. And so that, I suppose, is a good argument for the data block. That seems like a reasonable idea. And I don't know if we support data blocks inside data blocks. Does anyone know if we support that? I wonder. I'm very curious to know. What happens if we do that? Really hating the OpenGL startup time, man. It's brutal. So it looks like the answer is no. Right? Because there's profile. So it created a data block, but it does not nest it. Right? So I guess what that means is if you wanted to nest it, you would actually have to do that. Yeah. Interesting. So I think I'm sort of getting where this is at now. And it just needs a little, it needs a little bit of a reorientation of its thinking, right? Because you can kind of see how it just, nothing ever quite works right the way that we might want it to. So I'm going to stop for 1 second and just say, well, you know what? Let me finish getting the, let me finish putting the actual profile in there first, just to have it displaying something. And then I'm going to try to focus on cleaning up that interface a little bit, so we know exactly what we're actually going to say as the final debug, debug interface that all the code's going to have to actually use. So in theory, all I would really need to do here is that function list. That guy has to actually appear when we do a draw element. So when we do a debug draw element call, we actually need to have this occur, debug type counter function list. And it would have to do this. So I'm just going to grab this like so. It's just going to draw the exact same thing as the thread list, so it's not really going to draw the function list at the moment. But, that's no biggie. So let's see here. I do not see my function list. Let me see if I'm actually... Oh, and it is inside a data block though, right? So technically it has to be up here. There we go. So I do not see it, but I don't know why. So I'm going to check to see whether we actually... is that just because it never gets stored inside the data block because of the interception call? Like if I take care of that, so it gets through the other one, I guess that is what would add it. Yeah, there it is. All right. Okay. So, I mean, I roughly get how it's all working now. And so now we just have to decide how to make this stuff a little cleaner, right? Because we're sort of on the cusp of it, but it needs to get smushed down. It's just too all over the place at the moment. And I'm not gonna be happy with that at all. So let's bounce back here and let's just take a look at the interface stuff real quick. And let's just decide or try to like play with the actual code that's being called and say, okay, if this is all that we're gonna have, right? Everything's gonna go through this from now on. This is what we get. How is this gonna work? We know we've got our timed function stuff, and that's all fine. So I feel like the timed function stuff doesn't probably need to be touched. The timers are probably okay. And so all we really need to do now is figure out how to make sure that our data stuff comes out okay. And let's think about how we want that to work, right? So if I'm constructing like a menu thing here that I want to have happen, I probably want to do something, where the end data block, maybe the end data block is actually just implicit, right? So maybe it looks something like this, right? So maybe we just don't do begin end at the moment. Maybe we just do debug data block. That's the data block, right? And these debug values, I guess they can just be named. These are just named weird because they used to have the underscores. And I think we want to just say, like, that's just not, we don't care about that anymore, right? If we want to, we could do this, right? And now that debug data block would be automatically closed. Like we could just make a little struct that had a constructor-destructor pair, like we did for the timed function. So we could do that. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it's okay, right? Same thing if we want to do here, like so. And that seems okay. So, we can do something like that. And in this case, the question is just, how do we want to indicate the hierarchy? Do we want to use the underscores like we were doing before? In this case, since the data blocks, these are just straight up actual names, we can actually just make these be strings, first of all, right? We could just make this be something like that. And so here, this way we could use underscores if we wanted to be able to talk about things with underscores. We could use a slash to sort of do a path-like syntax, right? So we could do something like this. And then, we need this sort of debug pointer ID. And the debug pointer ID thing is, again, it's just we need some kind of GUIDs there, right? We need GUIDs so that we can recognize these data blocks uniquely across multiple runs of the program. And there's two ways we could do that. One way is with this string, and the other one is by using the pointer. The reason I'm not sure about using the string is just because I may want to talk about multiple debug blocks that all have the same name. So for example, if I'm talking about an entity, I don't know, like there's two different sort of notions of that, like the selected entity. It's like there's the entity that's selected right now that I might be talking about, or I might be talking about the concept of the selected entity. And those are actually like two different things. So I'm not really sure how that shakes out exactly. And I don't know which one we would want to do. I guess in the interest of making it a little bit, again, to reduce the complexity, one way to think about reducing the complexity would just say, well, this is the simpler of the two, and it just has to hash the string, right? In order to figure out, it just has to use a hash of the string to look that up. And maybe that's the best option, right? That might be the way to go. Because again, just simplifying things might be nicer than not. So if we were going to do it that way, that's relatively simple. We can just say there's a debug data block, and then everything that we say after it kind of goes under it as a hierarchical element. And we can add like slashes and stuff so that it can expand out into something that we can view easily. That seems good enough. Debug value seems pretty reasonable, and I don't think we need to edit that much. So I feel like this is a pretty reasonable way. Like, is there anything in particular that we would have been wanting to do that we couldn't do with that, without, you know, that this would be a problem for? I don't know. Let's take a look at what would happen if I actually want to make this work without these weird names, though, right? If I was going to actually have this kind of come through, I would have to do like, okay, this is debug renderer, camera, I guess, is what that is. And then I'd have to close this debug block. And then I'd have to open another one and say like, oh, this is game ground chunks, right? And then here I'd have to say like, oh, this data block is renderer. I guess this isn't global. Something like that. I don't really know. There's that ground chunks. You can kind of see what I'm doing here, right? So there's the renderer. Probably would put that up here. This way I can even kind of see it a little bit clearer, right? It's like a submenu. Let's see, global AI familiar follows hero. So that's in AI. And I guess it was an AI familiar, even. And this is in particles. And this is in simulation. Right? That's basically what we're looking at here. So, yeah. So if you assume that this was like, you know, if that's reasonable, then we would be, you know, that's not too bad, right? I mean, we can handle that. That's not too messy to work with, I think. It seems okay. So yeah. So let's assume that that's okay. If that's okay, then let's just kind of clean up a little bit of how it's going, and I guess we just need to have a way for that GUID to not be weird, right? Yeah. So if we come back over here for debug data block, here's our begin data block and our end data block. What we need to do here is we just need to make #define debug data block with the name of the data block. Has to basically be an instantiation of like exactly, it has to do exactly the thing that we were doing here, where we got a new timed block. You can see how we did that. It was this sort of thing, which unfortunately means we got to do the ridiculous macro expansion that I hate. Thank you so much, C++, for that. So if we go back here to data block, we have to essentially copy the exact same thing. So this is going to be like debug data block. Yeah, debug data block. Although actually, no, we don't, because you can only open, because the way we're doing it here, you only open one, and you've got to have the bracket so that it'll close it when you're done with it. So maybe we don't really have to do that. What we could say is just like, since we know that's the pattern we're using, we don't have to worry about the timed block thing. That is potentially compelling, right? Because, so we could actually do debug data block, like so. Something like this. and that would presumably just work, because since these are always at the top of a scope, we don't have to worry about you making that name unique, like we did when we did the time blocks, because we wanted the time blocks to be able to work inside. So that's maybe what we should do. It just makes it a little easier on us. So here we would just have, instead of begin data block end of we just have debug data block. I don't know if we ever did begin array and end array. It looks like that never actually did anything. So I don't actually know if we were expecting that to do something. Maybe we were, I don't know. But if we have this for begin data block now, then we just need this data block to actually do something. So that is just going to be something which automatically opens and closes it. So the constructor has to do this on end and this on begin. Oops, except I don't actually want to be a macro, certainly. And so I think that is roughly what it should be. So debug data block, there's all that stuff. So when we do an open data block, we now know what the name is because we said the name is going to be passed in. So that's easy enough. We don't actually know some of the rest of this stuff. And I guess the question is, since this is in a macro, I also don't know if we need to pass in some of the other stuff like the GUID. I don't think so, really. But like we would have to pass in all of this stuff, like, right? Because we'd want to know the file and the line number potentially, if that stuff ever gets saved. I don't know if it does. I guess it doesn't really get saved for just a generic debug event. All that happens is just you get the event type in the block. The unique file counter string stuff, I don't know that we use that too much. In fact, I would like to know a little bit more about that. What does GUID actually get used for? Let's see. I can't actually see that because it's behind my head. Let's see. Debug ID from GUID. Where are we? This is an open data block. So if we're in an open data block, we basically go through and we try to determine what the ID is from the GUID. So I don't really know, like I feel like, again, I feel like this could be simplified down from where it is right now. But I see why that has to be there, right? We do need some way of talking about particular data. So unique file counter string, right? That sort of means that for any time you use record debug event, since unique file counter string is going to be happening where the record debug event call happened, you end up in a situation where like you can't actually, in fact, like in this circumstance, this is just wrong, right? Because this record debug event won't actually get a GUID from here. So you pretty much always need to have this passed through. Get thread ID is fine, event type is fine, RTSC, all of these things are fine. The event table stuff, all of this stuff seems fine, but unique file counter string I don't think can actually be there. I think record debug event kind of needs you to pass that GUID in, you know? I just feel like that's got to happen. That's my guess anyway. And so I don't know what the best way to do that would be, but I just think that, for example, when you call into one of these things like end block, I think it's gotta do that. I feel like that's gotta happen, because otherwise these aren't going to be correct. So I don't know if you could do unique file counter string here, like so. What I probably could do is say, well, unique file counter string obviously is going to produce a string. So what I could do is say, you know, whoever calls timed block here has to pass that in. Which isn't my favorite, to say the least, right? You can kind of see why I'm not thrilled about that. What does begin block do? It records you. So they both record a debug event, and they would end up recording a debug event with this as the location. You know, with that as the GUID, and that's just not what you would want. So I'm not sure how to really get around that correctly. And also, there seems to be a pretty big proliferation of things here as well. So I feel like maybe this should be cut down a bit. And the other thing that could be plausible here is that if the timed block just remembered what these were, it could remember the file name and the line number and the block name that came in here. And if it did that, then what it could do is say like, oh, okay, if those just are stored as part of, if those just come into the time block here as part of it, then they could be passed through as the GUID. Yeah. Yeah. So really what I have to do is untangle all this stuff. Again, not particularly glamorous, but yeah. This is why, if you ever wonder why I love metaprogramming so much, it's because you never have to deal with this ridiculousness. I mean, all of this stuff is completely unnecessary work. It's just because C++ doesn't actually support any of the features you would actually want for marking up your code. You will note that John showed the trivial metaprogramming example the other night in his programming language, where you can just say, hey, if there's a part where I'm going to profile this function, how about you insert the profiling code at that location, right? C++ Standards Committee, 30 years, hasn't managed it. It was too hard for them, but what are you going to do? All right, so anyway, working around that, I just got to make it so that this stuff gets passed through. So I think I'll keep this notion, this GUID thing, because it sort of smushes everything together into one piece, which sort of seems like a good thing, I suppose, to just only have to record one pointer to one string and get all of that information. And I also wonder if perhaps that isn't something that would be something to take to like the nth degree. Like if we know that this is always our format, so we have A with £B in there, which is the number, and then the block name. We could also say that this is going to be, okay, then there's like a colon, and after the colon, then we have then we have the name or something, right? And name could also be there, like so. So, if we were to do that, then we could get rid of block name, right? And we would only have like one thing, which is just like, what's the name of this thing, right? And it's the full name. It has everything in it that you might want stored once. And that way, you just have just that one string pointer. You also have so we'd have the clock, the type, the core. I'm going to look at see what an event has in it here. Here's a debug event. The clock, so this looks like we already had to do to remove it. Now we have. I guess I'll keep it named GUID just for now, because that way we have less compile errors to fix. So we've got the GUID, we've got the thread ID, the core index, and the type. And so that's two 64s. Looks like we're a little unbalanced here. You would think we would want a few more of these, but I guess that's not in the mix, right? I mean, we're missing some stuff here, so man, that's a little odd, but whatever. So anyway, this is still relatively small, so that's good. This is a little bit too much of a payload for it, I would think. So we probably, at some point, would want to make these not be quite so verbose if we were worried about it, but I guess we're not. So anyway, this is fine. That should give us all the information we actually care about. And then we'll just count on parsing it after the fact. So I think that's really all I want to do. That seems reasonable. And so in here, the block name no longer has to get passed in. It's just what type of event you're recording and the GUID that you're recording there. That's the only thing that you need to tell it. So now when you have something like this, that just sort of works. Actually, I shouldn't say GUID. This is actually just a name, right? Oh, no, it is GUID. So something like this where you want to do a frame marker and you do the counter, what you need to do here is just say like, I guess we should call this debug GUID or something like this. Debug, debug GUID, debug GUID. Yeah, not sure about that. So in here, what we would want to do is have this maybe be something that's a little easier to type. So we could call this, you know, maybe that's a debug name. Something like that. I don't think that's used anywhere. So here I can just say like record debug event, and then I just say here's the debug name, and that would wrap that up in all of the niceties, I believe. So now we would get, you know, like the file name, the line number, the block name, and then finally the counter, and then finally the actual frame marker part. So that seems fine. All right, so let's pretend that that's good. Let's just pretend it's good. I'm not saying it actually is, but let's pretend. I also don't know what int counter equals counter. Is that some kind of flow through thing? Where does the counter... What is this? What does this do? Does anyone know? Is that some kind of... I don't think that does anything. I think that's vestigial remain. So I think we're literally just talking about this now, right? Does that seem reasonable? So the frame marker is just record this debug event and set the value to whatever the second to lapse was. That's our, you know, that's our frame counter. And then we've got this record debug event where this is the thing that will actually do the work for us, and you know, off it goes, and that's all fine. And yeah. And counter is just not used in there, so I just don't think that has anything to do with anything. I think we could just ignore it. So in here we've got our timed block. Our timed blocks, like I said, are going to be calling out to this guy right here. I'm going to move that up so I can actually see it here. Well, actually, I guess it's got to be below this to call the macros, so maybe I won't. But anyway, in time block, that's going to have to produce these grids now, because everyone who has a record debug event now has to pass a debug name at the end. So something like this, where we have the begin block, it's not going to pass this stuff anymore. It's got to just pass the GUID in directly, right? So anytime you do that, it's got to be this. That's the only option. And the same thing is true here. So when you do a record debug event, I don't actually know what exactly that's going to do, but it would have to take a GUID as well, right? So something like that. Again, not sure what the deal is with the counter. I guess this was something that we were using before, but I do not know. That must have just been a completely vestigial remain from back when we were manually inserting the slots. Because now that we just do the atomic add to get the location of this thing, it just doesn't matter, right? So that's all. There's just a ton of code. I'm glad that we're cleaning this up because there's just a ton of stuff here that we experimented with that we just don't need, right? I mean, we just straight up don't need it. So yeah, so that's kind of good to know because yeah, none of this stuff is necessary at all. In fact, I don't even know why we have two of these now, to some degree, because I mean, I guess I can sort of see why we might want them just to make the begin and end block thing work properly. But really now all this is going to be is when you pass the name here, it's just going to call begin block with debug name and the name you passed it. I mean, that's all it has to do, right? And the same is true of this guy. Really, really straightforward. So that kind of cleaned that up pretty nicely, which is kind of cool. I'm glad about that. But anyway, so now if we get into here, if we get into this business here, this is a little bit tougher. Of course, now we don't even have to store counter, which is great. Because we don't have to store counter, then this struct now is free, right? It doesn't take up any room on the stack if the optimizer's not smart enough to get rid of it. It's never asked to take up any room on the stack, which is kind of great. And so now if we've got the time block stuff here, when we do this initialization of the time block, you can see the stuff that's passing. We don't want to quite do it like this anymore. What we want to do instead is just say that, well, whatever our block is that we were trying to do, it just has the GUID, and that's it, right? We don't need anything else because the only thing we need to do is call begin block with that GUID. There is nothing else to do, right? I mean, that's all there is to it. Really straightforward. So if we call begin block with that GUID, we can eliminate all of this stuff. I guess we got to leave the to do in there because we never actually do that. We never actually did the hit count tracking, right? I don't know if we care about that or not, but we might want to at some point. Maybe when we get to the end of this. And then when we do this end block here, I'm going to just call this like timed block like that, so that it can just say, oh, okay, it's gonna, that's gonna be the closing one that we don't care about it having a unique GUID. We only care about this one. We only care about the opening having a unique GUID because the closing can just refer back to the opening to know what its GUID would have been. So that's pretty easy. So that's time block in a nutshell there. Then when we get here, when we're like time function and all this nonsense, right? Now all of this stuff should be actually really, really straightforward. In fact, I don't think we need any of this because now that we have this function for doing stuff, I feel like we should be able to just say, oh, okay, if you're going to call time block or time function, then all we need to do is just create one of these guys, right? Actually, before I say that, no, I lied. So we still do need it for number because we need to append number on here if we want multiple of them. So not quite a home run. We still got to have this ridiculous macro for no real good reason, but what are you going to do? So what we can do here, though, is say, all right, all of the other stuff with the line and all that stuff, that at least can go away. Because when we do this here, all we really have to do is when you call a time block and you say, I guess, name, then what we call through here is just going to be debug name, that name. And similarly with the timed function, I think the exact same thing is what we would do. We would just say that we would have debug name of function, like so. And similarly with the time function, I think the exact same thing is what we would do. We would just say that we would have debug name of function, like so. And similarly with the timed function, I think the exact same thing is what we would do. We would just say that we would have debug name of function, like so. And similarly with the timed function, I think the exact same thing is what we would do. We would just say that we would have debug name of function, like so. and then this stuff doesn't have to happen, right? And so the same is true for all of this. This all goes away. You don't need the counter, the file, or the line, or the block name. We're just passing the GUID, and that's the end of it. So I think that's like basically does all the same stuff, so no differences, but at least now it's much more straightforward and simple. So we don't have, sort of arbitrary nonsense happening in there that just makes things more complicated for no reason at all. All right. So we now have, I think, all the stuff we wanted from here. So that's all re-input and good. Let me give that a quick compile and fix anything that's busted. Syntax error string. So end block is not happy with my string for some reason, but I'm not sure why. Because begin block apparently was fine. So what did I do wrong there? Begin block underscore is record debug event. It's this call right here. And so that all seems fine. End block is record debug end block. I'm not sure I see the problem. Let's take a look. So in debug name, we've got unique file counter string. It basically just passes 4 strings, right? File, line, counter, and name. So A, B, C, and name, which is exactly what we thought. And in fact, I guess I could do it more like this, like so. I don't see the problem here. I don't see the problem, to be completely honest with you. So begin block works fine, but that's what we would expect. It's only when we try to actually create one of those debug names that we are unhappy. Oop, that's not what I meant to do. When it creates that end block, it's unhappy. Of course, it won't show me the expanded macro, so I can't debug it, of course, because that would be way too easy. I could run the preprocessor on it and just look at what it expanded to. Or I can try to work through it here. So I'm going to pass name in there. We're going to call debug name with that string. So it's going to be passing 4 strings here, I believe. At least that's what I was hoping it would do. And assuming that file works, then that's definitely the case. So I'm not sure what the problem is with that. Let's just try this. Missing before identifier, pound to find debug name. It should be, yeah, that should be. That's exactly what we would expect. So it's literally just this one. It's only end block that's the problem. So debug name by itself is not a problem. It's only end block that is the problem. And end block is a problem for reasons that I don't necessarily understand. So let's try, just for sake of an argument, let's try expanding this out a few times to see what actually happens. So if I was to grab this, so now instead of calling end block, I'm going to call end block underscore, and I'm just going to pass timed block to it. Oops. And just make sure I get the same error, and I do. So end block with the debug name of time block is a problem for it, clearly. So just calling debug name with time block, I'm wondering if that just by itself is enough. And it looks like the answer is no. So if I don't call through the macro, then it's not a problem. If I do call through the macro, then it is a problem. Meaning I cannot do that for reasons that I am not sure what they are. Probably due to the vagaries of C macro expansion, which are absurd. Just my guess. So what is it that it doesn't like about that? Because it allows me to pass the file just fine here. So is it just the fact that it's a parameter that's the problem? For some reason? I've got A, B, C, and D. Those all look relatively straightforward, assuming that D is an actual string, which it is. And that should be fine. And passing record debug event that GUID shouldn't have been tricky either. So I'm not sure what the problem is there. I'm not sure. That's a good question. I wonder if I can just pre-process this file and see what it actually expands out to be. That's always a little bit dicey of a proposition, certainly. Let's take a look. I might as well give it a shot. So let's see. I think less is on this machine. Less. Just gonna pipe it to less. Oops. And then I'm gonna search for process. Preprocess to standard out, or preprocess to file. So /e should be what we want, and preprocess standard out with no line directives probably want. So /ep is probably my best bet, would be my guess, right? So if I come in here and do a /ep of handmade.cpp, and I pipe that to preprocess.temp or something, in theory, I should get, again, totally in theory, I should get a file that shows me something of what happened in the preprocessor. Oh, fabulous. And it includes all the blank lines, of course. Well, all right, doesn't matter. We can still search for tilde timed block, presumably. Maybe not. Kind of need something. I guess we need something that actually will have used it. But shouldn't I see tilde timed block? I mean, shouldn't I be able, if it actually preprocesses it, shouldn't I be able to see tilde timed block somewhere? I feel like I should. Huh. It's a bit weird. Some C runtime library stuff getting included into our code. So, like, is timed block not in here at all? It does appear not to be in here at all, which is kind of odd. It should not have gotten removed. Ah! Yes, it should have. You know why? Because I did not specify the pound define, so all of our debug code got removed. That's fine. Easy enough to fix with a -de, handmade internal. Or actually, how many switches do we need to turn on debugging? Just handmade internal. Handmade internal equals 1. Now, if I load preprocess, now we should get the timed block. There it is. All right, so let's see what we actually end up with when we preprocess this monstrosity. I'm going to go ahead and make these into separate lines just so it's not too heinous to read. There we go. Oh, wow, okay. That's kind of funny. Yeah. Okay. So it looks like it actually inserted this after thread ID equals UX can get thread ID. It did event GUID equals GUID. I just was too dumb to do like this as a separate thing. So it just inserted, yeah. It just it replaced that with the actual GUID. Kind of silly. So hopefully that's it then, which means I can just, switch back to this, I would think. That's hilarious. I like that. Yeah, I'm a fan. I also think that maybe if endblock never really cares about what its GUID is, then really it should not need a name. So this is probably best to just do like, you know, some generic name that we don't care about. Because that way, you know, nobody who actually ever calls endblock should care. If they don't care, they don't care. So, you know, forget about it. So that seems reasonable. All right, so that was easy enough. And you know what? I should mention something as an aside here. That is yet another bonus of the Unity style build, like the, or what do we call it? Single compilation unit build, I guess, whatever you want to call it. Single compilation unit build, a SCUB. Doesn't sound that good, but single compilation unit build, if you want to pre-process a file, that's all you have to do, and you can pre-process the whole thing. Normally, it can be kind of confusing if you want to preprocess a file because you have to go figure out how it was built in some big build system and then just get the preprocess of that thing or whatever. It's kind of nice when you know that you can always do a separate compile with different switches as a pretty trivial thing to do. All right, looks like we're out of time, so I'm going to take a quick look here at what we're doing before moving on. Debug ID, debug pointer ID. What is this saying? Before debug pointer ID. Debug ID is not defined? Is that true? It's right there. What you complaining about? Oh, it's you just complaining about something that we did up here, probably. Missing semicolon before. So what's the problem? Is it just our data block situation? Yes, it is. It's just that. There we go. So we haven't done this. This stuff is not finished yet. Block name undeclared identifier. Timed function. Let's take a look at that. So timed function. So in timed function, where is block? Oh. So we do timed block with the name, and we wrap up the debug name. So really, this is not supposed to be. It should just be that, right? And actually, I think furthermore, it probably should just be, yeah, no, it calls through, so it should be that. So it's that. So what's the problem there? Block name, oh, we changed it. We changed it to GUID. So that's it. Okay. So now, I guess that's about all there is to that. These kind of have to be fixed up. So what I'm going to do, I guess, because I don't really want to go too long on that, I'm just going to go ahead and make our build.bat not run internal. That way we'll still be compiling, I think. All right, so wait, but is that because we didn't poundify those or something? Begin block, end block. Where's the data block stuff? So it should have done this, right? It should have been debug data block. Ah, it's because we got rid of these and haven't really done anything with them yet. Okay. So we have debug data block, and that is that. Post can access the file because it's being used by another process. All right. And platform controls, this is also a data block here. All right. So I'm going to leave it like that for now. We should be okay, just running without any debug information. And then tomorrow we'll pick back up and finish that cleanup. All right. Good deal. Looking for cues. John is struggling with fonts. All right. It can be kind of a chore to install fonts on Windows sometimes. That is true. One time I could not figure out why a font wasn't installing. It turns out you cannot install a font from a substance drive. Caleb, how the heck do you quickly get back into some obtuse code that you haven't looked at in 6 months? Well, you saw it's kind of slow going, right? It's like I gotta kind of page it back in a little bit. That's okay. There isn't much to probably ask questions about at the minute. Like we're at the moment, it's not a very complicated thing. So we could just end it early, and that way everyone can go watch John, which seems like a very good idea to me. Especially if he needs to install fonts or something. Maybe someone can help him who knows font things. Oh, Insobot. All right, so I'll go ahead and wrap up. All right, thank you everyone for joining me for another episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you as always. If you would like to follow along with series at home, you can of course pre-order the game on handmadehero.org, and it comes with a source code so you can download it and keep up to date with what I'm doing and play around with it at home. We also have a forum site you can go to ask questions. We have a Patreon page you can use to support the video series. We have a tweet bot you can use to follow the schedule. And if you would like to use the editor that we use here on stream, it is actually made by someone on the chat. It's in progress. It's in development as we speak. It's called 4Coder. You can type 4Coder, like I did, into Google to find it. And if you pledge to support the project, you can get a copy early, which is what I'm using. That's it for today. John is streaming some JAI development stuff right now, so if you would like some more programming in your evening, I highly recommend checking that out and taking a look at where he's at with his programming language development. I will be back here tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time if you would like to see us finish up the debug stuff. So until then, have fun programming. I'll see you guys on the internet or perhaps on John's stream. Take it easy, everyone.